The distress call emerges. It was just another routine day aboard the Seraphim, a spaceship assigned to patrol the outer regions of the galaxy. The crew, a seasoned team of explorers and soldiers, went about their tasks with practiced ease. Captain Drayden stood in the command center, gazing out into the vast expanse of space. The stars glimmered softly, and everything seemed peaceful. But in the silent depths of space, peace could quickly vanish. Suddenly, an alert flashed on the screens. A distress signal had been intercepted. It was faint at first, barely a whisper in the void, but it was growing stronger. The message was filled with fear, its words scrambled and jumbled, as if the sender was running out of time. "Help us. We are under attack. They're coming. Please, help. Anyone." The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving the crew in stunned silence. The signal came from an unknown location, a remote sector in the farthest reaches of the galaxy. It was not a region anyone visited often. Dark, isolated, and forgotten by most. The source of the message was impossible to pinpoint, but the fear in the voice was undeniable. Captain Drayden's mind raced. The galaxy was no stranger to conflict, but this felt different. There was something urgent in the distress call, something that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. Whoever had sent the signal was in grave danger, and they were desperate for help. But who could they be? And why hadn't anyone heard from them in years? He looked over at his first officer, Lieutenant Riva. She was already scanning the ship's systems, trying to trace the origin of the signal. "What do we have, Lieutenant?" he asked, his voice calm but his eyes sharp. Riva frowned, her fingers dancing across the control panels. "I'm running a full trace, Captain. The signal's too weak to pinpoint with precision, but it's definitely coming from the outer rim. It's a long way from here." Drayden considered the options. The signal was old, and the coordinates it came from suggested it was far from any known colony or outpost. It could be a trap, a decoy to lure ships into danger, or it could be real, a desperate cry for help from somewhere forgotten by time. Either way, someone out there was in trouble. "We can't ignore this," Drayden said firmly, turning to his crew. "Prepare for a course change. We're going to investigate." The crew quickly sprung into action, some of them expressing concerns about the dangers of heading into such an unknown and potentially hostile part of the galaxy. But Captain Drayden was resolute. They had a duty to respond, no matter the risks. As the Seraphim changed course, heading toward the distress signal's last known position, an uneasy silence settled over the ship. The crew knew that this wasn't just another routine mission. Something was off, something they couldn't explain. The energy in the command center shifted as the ship accelerated into the unknown. Hours passed as they journeyed deeper into the void. The stars outside the windows grew dimmer, and the vast emptiness of space began to feel heavier. Drayden couldn't shake the feeling that they were being drawn into something much larger than they anticipated. "We're getting closer," Riva said, breaking the silence. Her voice was laced with both concern and determination. "But there's still nothing on the scanners. No signs of life, no ships, no structures. Just emptiness." Drayden stared at the screens, trying to make sense of the growing unease within him. What's causing the signal to still be active? It shouldn't be broadcasting after all this time. The uncertainty gnawed at him, but he couldn't back down now. He had made the decision to go, and there was no turning back. They had to know what happened out here. They had to find out who was behind the call, and why they had been left alone for so long. As the Seraphim neared the coordinates, the sensors began to pick up strange readings. Something was out there. The crew's attention sharpened. The usual calm atmosphere on the ship was replaced with a sense of tension that none of them could ignore. Suddenly, the communications officer spoke up. "Captain, we're receiving a faint transmission. It's not the distress signal. It's something else. It's an anomaly. It's a large structure." Drayden's heart raced. Could this be the source of the call? A structure, hidden away in the depths of space, waiting for them to find it. "We've got to get closer," he ordered. "Prepare the shuttle. We're going in." As the crew prepared to investigate, Drayden couldn't shake the feeling that whatever awaited them at this mysterious structure was far more dangerous than anyone could have imagined. The galaxy was vast, and in its forgotten corners, dangers festered. This distress call, the one that had seemed so simple at first, was now a thread that could unravel something much darker. The journey into the unknown. The Seraphim slowly made its way towards the unknown structure. The atmosphere on board grew tense as the crew watched the strange readings on their monitors. No one knew what they would find, but it was clear that they were stepping into uncharted territory. Captain Drayden paced the command deck, his eyes scanning the view screen, watching the stars blur as the ship accelerated. He couldn't help but feel the weight of the decision. They were heading into one of the most isolated sectors of the galaxy, a place where even the most experienced explorers dared not go. Yet the distress signal had called them, and now they had no choice but to follow. "Any more information, Lieutenant?" Drayden asked, his voice steady but his mind racing. Lieutenant Reva continued to work at the controls. "We're still not picking up any clear signals from the structure itself, Captain. It's almost like it's cloaked, or the tech is way ahead of anything we've seen. I can't pinpoint the exact nature of it yet." The silence in the command center was palpable as the crew exchanged nervous glances. They had no idea what kind of technology, or even what kind of life forms, could be hiding out in the darkness. This mission, once a routine search for a distress signal, had now become a journey into the unknown. Hours passed, and the Seraphim inched closer to its destination. As they drew near, the massive structure slowly took shape on the view screen. It looked ancient. Its design was unlike anything in the galaxy's known archives. The structure was enormous, an imposing figure against the backdrop of the stars. It was almost as if it was alive, a twisted, organic shape that seemed to pulse with a strange energy. "Captain, look at this!" Riva suddenly shouted. The view screen flickered and zoomed in on the structure. There, in the midst of the darkness, they could see faint outlines of symbols etched into its surface, glowing faintly. It almost looked like some kind of ancient alien writing, but none of the crew recognized it. "What do you think it is?" Drayden asked, his voice filled with uncertainty. Riva shook her head. "I don't know. I've never seen anything like it. But one thing's for sure. It's not a structure we've built, and it doesn't match any known alien designs either." The unease among the crew grew stronger. The ship's systems began to flicker, as though something was interfering with their technology. The Seraphim continued to move forward, drawn toward the alien structure like a moth to a flame. "Prepare the shuttle," Drayden ordered. "We need to get closer. Riva, keep scanning the structure. If anything changes, let me know immediately." As the shuttle bay doors opened and the small team geared up to head down to the surface, tension gripped the crew. This was no longer a simple rescue mission. They were stepping into something far bigger, far more dangerous. They had no idea what awaited them beneath the shadows of the alien structure, but the unknown was pulling them in. The crew boarded the shuttle, the air inside thick with apprehension. It wasn't just the unknown of the alien technology that worried them. It was the feeling that they were not alone. That someone, or something, was watching them. The hairs on the back of their necks prickled as they set course for the surface of the unknown structure. As they descended toward the surface, the structure seemed to grow larger, more imposing. It was like a giant monolith, an ancient sentinel of sorts, standing tall in the desolate void of space. The shuttle began to shake as they got closer, the turbulence growing stronger. "Stabilizing," Riva called out as the ship shuddered. "We're almost there." The shuttle finally landed with a soft thud, the doors sliding open to reveal a barren, rocky landscape. The crew stepped out cautiously, their boots crunching against the dry ground. Before them stood the massive structure, its dark form towering above them like a giant looming over ants. Drayden led the team forward, his eyes scanning the surroundings. There was an unnatural stillness here, as if the entire area was holding its breath. The strange symbols from the structure's surface were visible up close, their faint glow casting eerie shadows on the ground. "This place, it's like nothing I've ever seen," said one of the crew members, his voice hushed in awe. Drayden nodded, but his mind was focused. They had to find out what had happened here. They had to understand the connection between this place and the distress call. As they ventured closer to the entrance of the structure, something strange happened. The air seemed to grow colder, as if the building itself was absorbing the heat around it. The tension was unbearable as they approached the entrance. Suddenly, a low hum filled the air, vibrating through the ground beneath their feet. The crew froze in place. Was it the structure coming to life, or was something more sinister at work? "Stay alert," Drayden ordered, his voice sharp. "We don't know what's waiting for us inside." As they stepped through the massive doors, the darkness swallowed them whole. The only sound was the soft hum that echoed through the walls, a haunting reminder of what lay ahead. What had happened to the people who had sent the distress signal? What dark secrets did this ancient structure hold? The answers were just beyond their reach, and they would have to dig deeper into the heart of the unknown to uncover them. The journey had only just begun. The mysterious arrival. The crew of the Seraphim stepped into the vast interior of the ancient structure, their footsteps echoing eerily in the silence. The walls were slick with something that looked almost organic, pulsing faintly, as though the very walls themselves were alive. The air inside was cool, but heavy with an unexplainable energy that seemed to hum through the bones of everyone present. Captain Drayden led the way, his hand on the sidearm at his hip. He could feel the tension building, as if the walls themselves were watching them. Every shadow seemed to shift, every sound amplified. He had seen ancient ruins before, but this felt different. This wasn't just a forgotten outpost or a long-abandoned colony. It felt like something more, something much older and far more dangerous. "Stay sharp," Drayden ordered, his voice low but commanding. "We don't know what we're dealing with here." Lieutenant Riva was busy scanning the surroundings, her eyes glued to the small device in her hand. "Captain," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "I'm not getting any life signs. But there's something off about this place. It's almost like the entire structure is dormant." "Dormant?" Drayden repeated, turning to face her. "What do you mean?" Riva hesitated. "It's as if the place is waiting. Like it's been inactive for a long time, but is somehow aware of our presence. I don't like it." Drayden's gut instinct told him they were stepping into something far beyond their understanding. But they couldn't turn back now. They had to find the answers, had to understand the connection between this place and the distress signal that had brought them here. The deeper they went, the more the structure seemed to change. The walls shifted from smooth organic shapes to jagged crystalline formations, each one reflecting the dim light of their torches. There was no clear pattern to the design. It was as if the structure had grown over time, changing with every passing age, adapting to something unknown. The crew moved carefully, their movements slow and deliberate. They passed strange symbols, etched into the walls like some kind of forgotten language. Lieutenant Riva attempted to analyze them, but the symbols made no sense. They were unlike any known language or writing system in the galaxy. "Anything?" Drayden asked as he watched her tap away at her device. "Nothing," Riva responded with a frustrated sigh. "These symbols are unlike anything in the database. I can't translate them. But I'm starting to get a bad feeling about this. I think we've only seen the surface of what this place is." The tension grew thicker as they ventured deeper into the structure. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the sound of their footsteps and the occasional creaking of the ancient stone beneath them. Every turn seemed to lead them further into the unknown. The feeling of being watched intensified, and Drayden couldn't shake the sense that something, or someone, was waiting for them. Finally, they reached a large chamber. The size of it took their breath away. It was massive, far larger than anything they had encountered so far. The center of the room was dominated by an enormous dark object, an altar of sorts. It was covered in strange markings, and at the center, there was an open space, as though something had once been placed there. "What is this?" one of the crew members muttered, awe and fear evident in his voice. "It's a kind of altar, but it doesn't feel like one," Drayden mused aloud. "It's wrong. Too ancient, and yet, somehow, it feels alive." Suddenly, the air in the room shifted. The once quiet hum became louder, more insistent. The ground trembled beneath their feet, and the symbols on the walls began to glow. A strange energy filled the room, and the crew stepped back, unsure of what was happening. The creatures didn't speak, but they didn't need to. Their presence alone was enough to send a wave of fear through the crew. There was no sign of aggression, yet, but there was an undeniable sense of power, a feeling that these beings were not to be trifled with. As the creatures came closer, one of them raised a hand, and the ground trembled once more. The symbols on the walls began to glow brighter, the hum growing louder. It was then that the crew realized this wasn't just a structure. This was a gateway, and it was opening. Captain Drayden's mind raced. What kind of beings were these? What was the purpose of this structure? And what had they just unleashed? The answers were just beginning to unfold, and the deeper they went into the heart of the unknown, the more terrifying the truth became. The fate of the crew, and perhaps the entire galaxy, was now intertwined with whatever these creatures had planned. The battle for survival. The creatures were unlike anything the crew had ever seen. They moved with a grace that seemed unnatural, their long limbs stretching and shifting in ways that defied the laws of physics. Their glowing eyes locked onto Captain Drayden and his crew, filling them with an overwhelming sense of dread. As the crew took a defensive stance, Drayden felt the weight of the moment press down on him. His hand gripped the weapon at his side, but he had no idea if it would even be effective against beings this strange, this powerful. The creatures didn't seem to have any weapons. They were weapons. Their very presence exuded an otherworldly power. "Stay calm. Don't fire unless I say so," Drayden ordered, his voice steady despite the fear coursing through his veins. The last thing they needed was to provoke these beings into an all-out attack. One of the creatures stepped forward, raising its hand in a slow, deliberate motion. The ground trembled again, and the air seemed to shimmer with energy. The crew tensed, ready for the worst, but the creature didn't attack. Instead, it opened its mouth and released a series of clicks and hums, a language that was unintelligible to the crew, but somehow felt familiar. Riva, the ship's lieutenant, tried to translate with her device, but it only displayed static. "It's not speaking any language we know," she said, her voice filled with frustration. "This isn't in any database." Drayden's eyes never left the creature. They were clearly intelligent, perhaps more so than any race he had encountered in his years of exploration. But there was no way of knowing if they were hostile or just curious. The tense silence stretched, each passing second growing heavier. Another creature, slightly smaller than the first, stepped forward. It tilted its head, its glowing eyes scanning the crew with a cold, calculating gaze. The team could feel the power in the air, the oppressive weight of it pressing down on them. It was like standing before something ancient and vast, something that had seen eons come and go, something that could end them with the slightest movement. Suddenly, a sharp crack echoed through the room. One of the crew members, overwhelmed by fear, pulled his weapon and fired. The blast hit one of the creatures squarely in the chest. The alien didn't flinch, but the energy in the room shifted instantly. The creature's eyes flared with a sudden, dangerous intensity. Before anyone could react, the creature lifted its hand. The air shimmered, and a wave of force exploded outward, slamming into the crew. The shockwave sent them sprawling backward, crashing into the walls of the chamber. Drayden's head spun from the impact, his vision blurred. His ears rang with the deafening sound of the blast, and for a moment, he couldn't hear anything except the pounding of his own heartbeat. "Everyone get up," Drayden shouted, pushing himself to his feet. The crew struggled to regain their balance as the creatures began to advance. The peaceful, almost haunting air had vanished. Now there was no mistaking the danger they were in. This was a fight for survival. Riva was the first to recover, pulling a small device from her belt and activating it. She quickly adjusted the settings, and a holographic energy shield appeared in front of her. The shield flared to life just as another blast of energy from the creature's hands shot toward them. The shield absorbed the blast, but Riva staggered under the weight of the impact. "Fall back," Drayden commanded. "Move toward the exit." But there was no safe exit. The massive doors they had entered through were now sealed shut, as if the structure itself had sealed them in. The only way forward was deeper into the heart of the chamber, but that path was blocked by more of the creatures, who continued to close in, their movements synchronized and deliberate. "We need to fight back," Drayden said, his voice grim. They had no choice. They couldn't just sit there and wait to be picked off. "Target their weak points, if you can find them." The crew opened fire, but their weapons seemed ineffective against the creature's almost impervious hide. Each shot from their blasters bounced off harmlessly. One of the crew members fired a grenade at the advancing creatures, but it detonated too far away to do any real damage. The battle felt hopeless. The creatures moved faster than any human could react, their energy blasts and telekinetic waves effortlessly knocking the crew off their feet with each attempt to fight back. The tension was unbearable, and Drayden knew they couldn't hold out for much longer. Riva, struggling to keep her shield up, glanced toward Drayden. "Captain, there has to be something else we can do. We can't keep fighting like this." Drayden's mind raced. There was no escape, no backup, and no way to overpower these creatures with the weapons they had. He looked around the chamber, his gaze landing on the strange symbols etched into the walls, glowing even brighter now. The realization hit him with the force of a punch to the gut. "The structure," he muttered. "It's connected to them. It's the source of their power." Riva looked confused but nodded. "Then what do we do?" "We have to stop it," Drayden said, determination hardening his voice. "The power is coming from that altar. If we can disrupt it, maybe we can weaken them. It's our only chance." Without wasting another moment, Drayden sprinted toward the altar, motioning for the crew to follow. They fought their way through the barrage of energy blasts, using the remnants of their shields to block incoming attacks. Each step felt like an eternity, but they had no choice. The creatures were relentless. As they reached the altar, the ground trembled beneath them, and the energy in the room reached a boiling point. The altar itself began to glow brighter, and the creatures let out a low, menacing growl. Drayden knew they were running out of time. With a final push, Drayden activated the device he had recovered from the shuttle, an EMP emitter capable of short-circuiting electronic systems. If it worked, it might disrupt the structure's power and give them a fighting chance. He turned the device on and aimed it toward the altar. The moment it activated, a massive pulse of energy surged through the room, and the creatures recoiled in pain, their forms flickering. For the first time since their arrival, the creatures hesitated, but the damage had been done. The structure was alive, and now it was fighting back. The battle had only just begun. The truth unveiled. The moment the EMP pulse surged through the room, the creatures staggered, their glowing eyes flickering as if momentarily disconnected from the force that had been sustaining them. The entire chamber was filled with an eerie, unnatural silence. The energy that had been so oppressive began to wane, leaving the air heavy and still. Drayden's heart pounded in his chest as he tried to process what had just happened. "Is it working?" Riva asked, her voice trembling, as she stood beside him, her shield still flickering with energy. Drayden didn't answer immediately. He was too focused on the altar. The once glowing symbols on the walls now seemed to pulse erratically, their brightness fluctuating wildly as the altar began to hum in a low, ominous tone. There was something in the air, something old, ancient, and terrifying. Then the walls shook violently. The ground beneath them quivered as if something deep within the structure had been disturbed. The entire building groaned, and for a moment, Drayden feared the entire place would collapse. A crackling sound erupted from the altar. It was as though the structure itself was trying to fight back against the disruption. The creatures, now more frantic, began to move again, but they were slower, their movements jerky as if they were no longer entirely in control. "This isn't just a weapon," Riva whispered, her eyes wide with realization. "It's a prison. These creatures were never meant to roam free." Drayden turned to her, his mind racing. "A prison? What are you talking about?" Riva pointed to the symbols on the walls. The writing. "It's not just a language. It's a record, some kind of warning. These creatures are ancient, and they were locked away here. The distress signal, the one we heard, it wasn't a plea for help. It was a warning. They were trying to escape." Drayden's blood ran cold. The implications were staggering. These creatures weren't just an unknown alien species. They were something much worse. They had been imprisoned here, in this forgotten structure, for a reason. And now, they were free. The ground trembled again, more violently this time, and a deafening roar echoed through the chamber. The altar's glow intensified, and the creatures seemed to draw strength from it, their bodies crackling with energy. It was clear now. They were not just an alien species. They were something far more dangerous, something capable of manipulating energy and space itself. "What are they?" one of the crew members asked, his voice trembling with fear. "Why were they locked away?" Drayden didn't have an answer. But the truth was becoming clearer with each passing moment. The creatures were an ancient force, beings who had once ruled or ravaged entire galaxies, perhaps long before humanity or any known race had ever existed. And somehow, their prison had been breached. "We have to stop them," Drayden said, his voice firm. "If they break free completely, if they regain full control of this place, they could unleash chaos across the galaxy. We can't let that happen." Riva nodded. "But how? The structure's tied to them. We can't just destroy it." Drayden's mind was racing. They had to do something, and they had to do it quickly. The creatures were growing more powerful by the second, and if they didn't act fast, the entire galaxy could be at risk. Suddenly, one of the creatures let out a deafening screech, and the room shook with even greater force. The creatures began to move faster, more aggressively now, their energy blasts hitting the walls and the floor, creating craters of molten rock where they struck. The crew scattered, trying to avoid the deadly blasts, but it was clear they were running out of time. "We can't keep this up much longer," shouted one of the crew members, panic creeping into his voice. "We need a way to stop them. Now." Drayden's eyes landed on the altar once again. He felt it. An energy, a dark pulse, emanating from it. The creatures were feeding off the altar, drawing power from it, and that was what was making them so powerful. If they could disrupt the altar completely, if they could sever the creature's connection to it, perhaps they could weaken them enough to fight back. "We have to destroy the altar," Drayden said, his voice resolute. "Riva, can you figure out how to disable it?" Riva moved quickly, scanning the altar with her device, trying to make sense of the energy readings. "It's unlike anything I've ever seen, but I think I can try. I need to overload the energy core. If I can set the right sequence, it might cause a chain reaction that could collapse the structure's power." "Do it," Drayden ordered, "but be quick. We can't hold them off forever." The creatures roared, their energy increasing as they charged toward the crew. Drayden could see the fear in his crew's eyes, but he knew they had no choice. They had to trust Riva. This was their only chance. Riva worked quickly, her fingers flying over her device as she input commands, trying to unlock the secrets of the altar's energy system. Every second felt like an eternity. The creatures were closing in, their attacks relentless. Drayden and the others fired their weapons, trying to buy Riva more time. but it felt like nothing would stop the alien assault. Suddenly, there was a loud click, and Riva's device emitted a soft peep. "I've triggered the sequence," she said, her voice tense but determined. "Get back. It's going to explode." Drayden motioned for the crew to fall back. As they sprinted toward the exit, the room began to glow brighter, the altar's energy pulsing with a fury that shook the entire structure. The ground rumbled beneath them as they reached the door. Drayden glanced over his shoulder. He could already see the glowing cracks in the walls, the energy that was building, ready to burst. "Move," Drayden shouted. They ran, adrenaline pushing them forward, until they reached the shuttle. But as the last crew member boarded, a deafening explosion rocked the entire structure. The shockwave sent them flying, and for a moment, everything went dark. When Drayden regained his senses, the structure was gone. Only rubble remained, scattered across the barren ground. The creatures were no more, but the weight of what they had just uncovered still hung heavy in the air. Riva stared at the wreckage, her eyes filled with a mix of relief and dread. "We've stopped them. But what else is out there? What else could be waiting?" Drayden didn't have an answer, but one thing was certain. The galaxy would never be the same. The truth had been uncovered, but the dark secrets of the past had only just begun to reveal themselves. The crew of the Seraphim had barely survived. But the real battle, against the ancient forces of the universe, was only just beginning. The final choice. The Seraphim drifted silently in the void of space, the wreckage of the ancient structure slowly fading behind them. The tension aboard the ship was palpable. The crew had narrowly escaped with their lives, but the cost was high. The ancient beings they had freed, the ones who had nearly destroyed them, were no more, but the truth they had uncovered was far more terrifying than anything they had imagined. Captain Drayden stood on the bridge, staring out at the stars. The aftermath of the mission weighed heavily on his mind. They had destroyed the altar, severing the creatures' connection to the energy that had empowered them. But what did that truly mean? The creatures were gone, but the questions remained unanswered. What do we do now? Lieutenant Riva's voice broke through his thoughts. She stood beside him, her face weary but resolute. We can't just go back to our routine patrols like nothing happened. Drayden shook his head, his eyes still focused on the stars. No, we can't. We've seen something that can't be unseen. Those creatures weren't the only ones out there. We don't know how far their influence reaches, or what else might be waiting. But we know this. We can't just turn a blind eye to it. Riva nodded, understanding the gravity of his words. So what do we do? The silence between them stretched. The entire galaxy was vast, and they had just barely scratched the surface of the mysteries hidden within it. But one thing was clear. Whatever they had encountered was just the beginning. The creatures they had faced were ancient, and there were forces out there far more powerful than they could have imagined. We need to warn the galaxy, Drayden said finally, turning to face her. We need to send a message. A warning. We're not the only ones out here anymore. There are things beyond our understanding, things that have been waiting for the right moment to emerge. The distress signal wasn't just a call for help. It was a warning. We can't keep this information to ourselves. We have to tell the galaxy what we've learned. Riva stared at him, a mixture of disbelief and determination in her eyes. You want us to send a message, tell the entire galaxy what happened. We don't even know who'll believe us, Captain. I know, Drayden replied, but we can't keep quiet. If we don't act now, if we wait too long, we'll be facing this threat alone. We need allies. We need the galaxy to unite. We have to let them know what's out there. Riva remained silent for a moment, then nodded. You're right. It's the only way. We've seen the darkness, and we can't go back to pretending it doesn't exist. We'll have to make them believe us, whatever it takes. The decision was made. The crew worked together to prepare a transmission, a message that would reach every corner of the galaxy. They had to warn the others. It wouldn't be easy. There would be those who would dismiss them, who would refuse to believe in the ancient forces they had uncovered. But there would also be those who would listen. There would be those who would prepare for what was coming. As the message was sent, Drayton stood by, his thoughts drifting to the future. He knew they had made the right choice, but the road ahead would not be easy. They were opening the door to a future filled with uncertainty, a future where the very fabric of the galaxy itself might be under threat. The forces they had unleashed had been contained, for now, but there were countless others like them. And the galaxy was vast. "Captain," Riva said, breaking his thoughts, "the message is out. It's going to take some time for the galaxy to process this, but at least we've done what we can." Drayton nodded, his expression grim. "Now we wait." The crew returned to their duties, but Drayton remained on the bridge, staring at the stars. There was a storm coming. He could feel it. They had disturbed something ancient, something powerful, and now the galaxy would have to face the consequences. But Drayton wasn't afraid. The Seraphim had faced the impossible and survived. And whatever came next, they would face it together. As the stars twinkled silently in the distance, Captain Drayton made a vow to himself and to his crew. They would be ready for whatever came next. The galaxy might not be ready, but the crew of the Seraphim would stand firm. They had seen the darkness, and now they would fight against it, no matter the cost. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. This was only the beginning of the fight for the galaxy's survival.